Of late, you might have noticed Russia siding with China whenever the US blames China for the coronavirus pandemic. Russia and China have grown very close in the past few years, but that does not mean that Russia is in any way smitten with China. In fact, this friendship barely exists. It's a strategic and temporary alliance mired in distrust and hatred. The only commonality between the two countries is their affinity for authoritarian communist regimes, and the way China is stealing defense technology from Russia. It is only a matter of time before the bubble of goodwill bursts. Russia is under crippling US sanctions, which have severely dented its economy. Russia has one of the best defense manufacturing capabilities, but it is unable to sell it to nations, as America has labeled Russia as an adversary under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, CAATSA, an American law which threatens America's friends with sanctions if they decide to do major trade, especially defense deals, with Russia. In this scenario, Russia has increasingly tilted towards its rich neighbor, China, but all is not well between the two. China is stealing Russia's military technologies. Russia is by far China's biggest arms supplier, as the country accounted for 70% of Beijing's arms imports between 2014 and 2018. Such is Russia's desperation that it is also selling its most advanced weaponry to China, as in 2015 it sold 6 of its S-400 defense missile systems and 24 of its Su-35 fighter jets for a whopping $5 billion. However, this hasn't stopped China from doing what it does best: steal. Rostec, a Russian state-owned defense conglomerate, has accused China of stealing its intellectual property. Rostec's chief of intellectual property projects has said, "Unauthorized copying of our equipment abroad is a huge problem. There have been 500 such cases over the past 17 years. China alone has copied aircraft engines, Sukhoi planes, deck jets, air defense systems, portable air defense missiles, and analogues of the Pantsir medium-range surface-to-air systems." China's modus operandi is simple: buy just a few jets from Russia, which they can reverse engineer and make a copy of, which will then be mass-produced for its military and allies like Pakistan. Russia can only disdain about this fact, and China has a history of stealing intellectual property from Russia. During the 90s, when it purchased the elite Su-27 fighter jets and the S-300 missile systems from Russia, it reverse-engineered and came up with the J-11 fighter jet and the HQ-9 surface-to-air missiles, which were nothing but a blatant copy of their Russian counterparts. In 2017, China rolled out the 5th generation Chengdu J-20 fighter jets, which are not only copies of Russia's Su-57E, but also technologically superior. Back then, in the absence of American sanctions, Russia severely curtailed its arms exports to China, as from accounting for 60% of Russia's arms exports in 2005, Russia's arms exports to China fell to 8.7% by 2012. And has now witnessed a rise again in the backdrop of sanctions over its actions in Ukraine in 2014. Russia has been reluctant to sell the S-400 Triumph anti-missile system to China, but it did nonetheless purely as a compromise, as, to put it bluntly, Moscow really needs the money. The border disputes between Russia and China are another bone of contention. Much like India and China, where there is a lot of ambiguity along the line of actual control, China similarly likes to claim a lot of ambiguous regions along its border with Russia. The two countries were on an undeclared military conflict for 7 months in 1969 until a ceasefire was signed. As a result of the war, China gained control of various islands. Although territorial disputes remain on the back burner since 2004, that may change given China's tried and tested expansionist motives. Another problem is Chinese investments in the far east of Russia. This is where misunderstandings and territorial tensions continue to exist between the two red powers. This sparsely populated Russian territory boasts of abundant natural resources, and Russia traditionally looks at it as vulnerable to Chinese influence or even colonialization. Today, China is eager to invest here out of its hunger for natural resources, but Russia wants to counter this dependence on China that was also a writing on the wall when India pledged $1 billion line of credit to Russia for the development of the Far East region. This was a small attempt at balancing things out in this region. The other huge bone of contention that will only worsen in time is China's increasing influence in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, which have historically been Russia's sphere of influence after the breakup of the Soviet Union. As China furthers its Belt and Road plans here, Russia is closely watching. So, the Russia-China Alliance is a product of compromise, given the authoritarian regime of one validates the other and their shared aversion to the USA. But China is fast becoming a defense manufacturer in its own might as it looks to export China-made defense equipment to other countries. In this case, Russia will be the biggest loser as cheap copies of its technology will be sold around the world by China.